The other day I was on a coaching call. He was talking to the gentleman on the other side, and he said, John, I have this issue, concern. Sometimes when I'm at the proverbial table, people don't listen to me. I have some great ideas, but no one's actually paying any attention. What should I do? Well, you know what? We're going to get to that here in just a moment. In the meantime, I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of John the PM, where we believe that managing projects is not just a job, but a way of life. All right, let's get back to that session. Brief recap. I was doing a coaching call with a individual client, and on the other side, he had a lot of concerns. But the one I want to highlight today is really the impact of influence and authority and how it kind of related to him. If you recall, he was at a proverbial table, and what we mean by proverbial table is that you're with a group of people. And he felt as if he was saying things, but no one was paying attention. And one of the key areas that we really talked about was influence versus authority and kind of what the difference is. And just very briefly, I want to go through that. Authority is when you have like the legal ability to execute a contract based on either your title, your role, your rank, whatever it may be. It's delineated by the operating agreement. Delegation of authority. I have the ability to commit this organization to paying these funds or to doing this work. That really is the kind of that classical example of authority. Influence is a little bit more subtle. It's where it's more on that personal side. It's where people gravitate to you, not because you are the authority leader. Now, you may very well be, but not necessarily the authority leader. And people just tend to follow you, or you're able to inspire them. That's more on the influence side. So you have influence and authority. You can have influence without authority. That's true. You can have authority without influence. That's true. I would think that what we really want is influence with authority. The titles and things of that nature I've talked about in previous sessions, those are important, but those are not necessarily the only driver. You can have the title, but not necessarily influence in order to get the work actually done. So again, in my world, in my thought is that you really need both in order to be a highly effective leader. So let me give you a couple of examples. A number of years ago, when I was doing my graduate studies, as a student, I had an opportunity to go to a luncheon. Okay, and so there's a lot of people there. I was very blessed to be able to attend, so that was awesome. I sat down at a table, and there was a group of people there, and another gentleman came by. He sat by me, just as a matter of fact. No one really appeared to know who he was, to be honest. He just, it's just a kind of a random thing. But I could tell by the way that he kind of led and guided and directed things, at the table, he had a lot of influence, even though no one was exactly sure who he was. Well, fast forward a few minutes, maybe about 30, 40 minutes later, well, guess who actually stood up in order to deliver the keynote speaker? Yes, it was the gentleman that had sat beside me. What it was that actually he was a Fortune 100 CEO who had flown into town for this event, which means that really no one in that area actually knew who he was. But I could tell that he was an individual that both mastered influence as well as authority, because clearly he had the authority to execute a lot of things within his world. He said, you know what? I want to be him. That is a great role model. Now, here's another example. And this occurred a few weeks ago. I was at a local retail shop. I had to get some work done on my home renovation projects. We all know, love them, like them. Sometimes they go better, sometimes they don't, but I don't want to digress. In either case, I walk into the store to finalize the quote, the statement of work, exactly what are we doing, how are we doing it, what's the timing, most importantly, how much this is going to cost, and when can you get it done, again, those areas. And I've been talking with this one individual, but that individual wasn't there. And this other individual came up. And she said, hi, can I help you? I said, yeah, so-and-so's not here. Okay, well, let me try. And so she kind of logged in onto the computer and did some workups and things. I could tell she knew everything. I was like, holy cow, who's this person on this? Could you help me out in the first place? And she kind of led and directed everything, as far and then kind of got us up to a settled close. And then we finished our business. And on the way out, she said, and as a reminder, my name is Penny. And I said, well, thank you, Penny. I really appreciate it. What is it that you do? Just out of curiosity. I'm actually in charge of the whole thing. Again, another example of influence and authority. Influence, she knew where everything was in. So she had that technical power, that technical ability to, who just happened to know the answers. People kind of gravitated towards her. She, one, was a very personable individual, but then two, she knew the answers. And three, she was extremely hopeful. But you know what? She also had the authority because she was actually the one legally in charge. So to me, that was a beautiful example of both influence and authority and how they connect. So you may be asking yourself at this point in time, John, maybe I have authority, maybe I don't. So that's a different topic, different discussion. We'll talk about that. But John, how do I increase my influence? How do I actually work on that? Well, here's a good suggestion. Go work for a nonprofit, volunteer, at a local community, a shelter, or whatever. It doesn't really matter what the activity is. Well, it does. Make sure that you actually enjoy the mission of that volunteer group. Okay, so make sure that you are aligned with the mission of that volunteer group, from a heart perspective. Now, when you get in, again, you do not have the ability to pay anybody anything. They're all volunteers. So you have to get them onto your side in order to deliver the work that you want done. Now, the first few times that you do this or try it, I surmise that you'll probably have a little bit of challenges on those areas. But after a while, you start really mastering the art of influencing others to go in a direction that you would like them to go, or perhaps that they would like to go. And you did that without actually paying them. Now, imagine if you had that particular skill set of influencing and you were in a corporate environment, a government environment, where you actually had the power of pay. I'm not surmising that you should start off with the power of pay. Don't do that. But I would surmise that that is an important part of it. So now you've managed to link in that influencing with the authority and tie them together. I cannot think of a better match, at least when it comes to this very, very specific topic. So hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the like, share, subscribe button. My team would greatly appreciate it. It helps us to be a better service back to you. In the meantime, may all of your projects be highly successful.